There's nothing Chicago politicians fear more than this broom. I'm Paul VALLAS, and I'll sweep out the money that has corrupted City Hall. I'll invest in schools, fighting crime, and creating jobs. I'm running for mayor to sweep out the Chicago machine and to invest in people and not corrupt politicians. I have the experience, the solutions, and the tools to do it. Join us in cleaning up City Hall for all Chicagoans.
Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Vivian Lanu with the Hellenic Heartbeat, and today joining me is former CEO of Chicago Public Schools and current candidate for mayor, Mr. Paul VALLAS. Hello and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We can start off by saying that it's a very congested race.
It is.
So how can you say, well, what would you say that, how do you stand out?
Well, first of all, my record. I've been a public servant all my life. In fact, I come from a family of public servants. Of course, I'm a grandson of Greek-American immigrants who grew up in the Rosen-Pullman community on the South Side. But there are 6 veterans in my household. There are 4 police officers in the VALLAS family. There are 3 teachers. There are 1, soon to be 2 firefighters, paramedics. My wife, who was a police officer, works for TSA. My niece is an airline pilot. So, you know, this is what we do. Public service has been a part of our life. But what makes me stand out is the fact that I have actually played a major role in helping the city address critical issues in the past. In the 90s, I was brought in to reform the corrupt revenue department. And then later on, I became the city budget director during a period of financial crisis in the 90s when the city was in a serious financial crisis, which, of course, I resolved, and I stabilized the finances and got the city on the right financial track. And then, of course, you know, I'm best known in Chicago as having become the nation's first CEO over a public school system. I was CEO of the Chicago Public Schools for 6 years and took the schools from a district that had been described by the Secretary of Education, William Bennett, as the worst in the country, into a district that became nationally recognized and was mentioned in more than one State of the Union address, taking a district that had massive budget deficits and transformed the district into not only 6 consecutive balanced budgets, but left the district with $1 billion in cash balances and 12 bond rating agency upgrades and 70,000 more students than we have today. I built 78 new school buildings, renovated 350 schools. It was President Clinton visited our school system no fewer than 5 times. We were made reference to us as being a model for the nation and the state of the state. So that's what I'm best known for. So if there is anyone who has I'm the best equipped candidate to come into the current situation that the city finds itself in, a situation in which the city is shrinking, it's losing population, it's losing wealth as measured by residential property values, 17% since the 2008 recession, and it's a city that has more murders than New York and LA combined. It's a city that has been in a severe financial crisis. It has $28 billion in unfunded pension debt. Clearly, there are 80% of the city has seen no investment over the last 30 to 40 years. The community that I grew up in, Rosen-Pullman area on the south side, is one of a number of communities that have been in a state of economic depression for decades. In fact, in the Rosen-Pullman area today, almost 70% of the men are in some phase of the criminal justice system.
So would you say that because of all of those problems, that's the main reason why you want to run for mayor? Well,
that's what's motivating me, the fact that the city is really on the brink. The city is shrinking, the city is declining, and it's a tale of 2 cities. The 3-mile areas around the downtown area is an area of growth and investment, and the rest of the 80% of the city has seen stagnant growth, and in some cases has seen disinvestment. You have communities that have lost 30, 40, 50% of their wealth. You have some communities that have 30, 40% unemployment. So clearly the city's in a major crisis. And I have always been a crisis manager. I have always been brought in to deal with governmental institutions in severe crisis. In Chicago in the 90s, after I left the Chicago Public Schools, I did similar work in Philadelphia. The state took over the failing Philadelphia School District. I was brought in to financially stabilize that district and begin to grow it. After New Orleans, I was, after the Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, I was asked to go to New Orleans and rebuild the entire school system. And after the devastating earthquakes in Haiti and then later Chile, I was asked by the international community to go to those countries and to work on rebuilding their education system. So this has been something that I've always done. I've always been a problem solver. And now my city, the city where my immigrant grandparents settled, the city where I was born and raised, the city that I love, is in deep trouble. And that has compelled me to run. And I think my record of public service and more importantly, my record of success, having managed 17 multi-billion-dollar budgets and having allocated resources in ways that have developed all the communities, have left few, if any, communities behind. I think that record of accomplishment makes me well suited to be mayor of the city.
It's safe to say that one of the leading problems here in Chicago is crime. You turn on the news, the radio, and you hear shootings after shootings after shootings in the South Side, West Side, pretty much everywhere, all over. Under the VALLAS administration, you guys discuss those issues. How would you ensure the prevention of these violent crimes?
Well, first of all, there's no substitute for investing in communities that have long been neglected. I mean, when you have communities where you have 20, 30, 40% unemployment, when you have communities where you have large numbers of individuals, large numbers of men in those communities who are in some phase of the criminal justice system, many of those individuals who have been previously incarcerated, and they now return to their communities with no skills, with no prospect for employment. I mean, and when you have communities where the schools aren't providing effective education, and high school students are dropping out at rates of 40 to 50%, and they're hitting the streets with no skills, with no real hope for their futures. I mean, this creates conditions for crime. And when you have communities that have been stripped of social services like mental health and wellness services and other social services that are critically needed by these families, family support services, et cetera, and when you have some communities that are so polluted that they have lead contamination in their water, and no safe level of lead is safe in the water, particularly for young children. So you wonder what the long-term impact is on children who have been drinking water with lead contamination over time, and how that's affecting their attention, what that's doing to create attention deficit disorders or interfering with their cognitive skills, et cetera. When you have situations like that, you're going to create conditions. You're going to create conditions in which crime is going to not only be prevalent, but the failure to deal with the problems of crime in those communities eventually begin to have an impact on other communities. Because while the murders have been predominantly confined to certain areas of the city, the crime nevertheless is spreading. You've seen it in the dramatic increase in carjackings and burglaries and muggings. So there's a lot of anxiety over public safety in every community, not just the poorest communities, but also the affluent communities. And the problems of crime and the lack of employment opportunities are driving many people away from the city. And what's happened in the poor areas, the poor communities, is for example, what's happened in the black community is over 300,000 working class blacks have left the city. They've moved to other cities because they want safer neighborhoods and they want better schools. So what you have in some of the poorer communities is their middle class is evaporating, and those cities are becoming poorer and poorer, and there's an absence of hope. There's an absence of optimism for the future. So you've got to get at those core issues, and I've articulated a plan on how to do that. And I want to say that before I talk about what needs to be done with the police department, because people always say, well, you got to get at the root cause of crime. Yes, but you also need a functioning police department. And what's happened to the police department over the past decade is it's become significantly degraded. By that, I mean they have failed to fill police vacancies like 1,500. They failed to fill their sergeant vacancies, which meant that there was less supervision. They used to have one sergeant for every 10 officers. Then they allowed that to digress to where they had one sergeant for every 30 police officers. That creates serious accountability problems. It undermines police effectiveness. And then they failed to fill detective division, so the number of detectives working cases dropped from 1,200 to a little over 700. New York has 4,500 detectives. And, so as a result, the net effect was the clearance rate on shootings dropped to like 5%. The clearance rates on murders, making arrests on murders, dropped below 20%. So in effect, we were catching 1 out of every 1 out of every 5 killers, and we were catching fewer than 1 in 10 shooters, and so that created, so that has been a major contributor to the crime problem in Chicago. So what I've laid out is a plan to, in effect, restore the police department by not only filling vacancies, but making sure that we have the proper ratios of sergeants to officers who are walking the beat. That's 1 to 10. Making sure we have training officers to work with the younger officers to provide them with guidance and to mentor them, and to restore the detectives division, not only by filling all the vacancies and getting back up to 1,200, but doing what other cities have done, and that is to go out and to bring out of retirement 400 to 600 retired police officers who have investigatory experience and know the communities and can go in there and can provide the supplemental resources that the detectives need to begin to clear these cases and to get these dangerous shooters off the street. So a big part of my plan is to restore the police department so we can get back to community policing, where we have police in the districts, dedicated to the districts, who know the districts and who are known to people in the districts, and they're not just being moved around all over the place because you don't have enough cops and because you've shut down the special units that previously had been designed to go into the trouble spots, and then to obviously restore the detectives division, but more importantly, to bring in seasoned veteran detectives who can work these cases and who are known and trusted by the community. So I've laid out a plan to strengthen the police department, to provide them with more resources, and to restore this, I call it this supervisory infrastructure, sergeants and training officers, so that the police department is not only more effective, but you also have accountability. So the plan has been laid out in detail, and the plan can be funded just through the savings in overtime. We've been paying $100 million more in overtime a year simply because we haven't been filling police vacancies. And all we get is tired cops working out of their districts, in districts that they're not familiar with. So I've laid out a very aggressive plan while acknowledging the need and making it a top priority to begin to redevelop these communities and give these communities hope, and to take these ex-offenders and to get them into adult ed and occupational training programs. I've also laid out a very specific plan to rebuild the police department and give them the resources and the support they need to be effective.
The city of Chicago obviously wants fast results, and my question would be, you've got this great plan. What is a time frame? Would you put a time frame on that? Like, how fast can all of these, these plans that you have, outlined take?
Right. Well, there's a lot.
What would you? I guess my better question to ask you is, what would you tackle first? What would be the most important thing to tackle that you think would the people of the city of Chicago, want to see results in?
Yeah. Well, the first thing. Well, let me tell you what you can do and what you can do right away. And this is what I did when I took over the Chicago Public Schools. And we had, I inherited a district that had 8 work stoppages in 15 years, and a district that had a structural deficit, a 5-year projected structural deficit of $1.5 billion. Not billion, $200 million. And, so clearly the district was in crisis, and I was able to quickly right that ship. The first thing I would do is to sit down, and my first budget will be a 5-year budget, because that's what I've done in every public service assignment, whether it was Chicago, Philadelphia, whether it was Bridgeport, Connecticut, and New Orleans, was to lay out a long-term financial plan. Because if you lay out a long-term financial plan, then and you structure the plan so that you're prioritizing spending so that you're investing in some of the core services needed to stabilize and grow communities, like public safety, like economic development, like infrastructure improvements, and things like schools. If you do those things, then obviously that begins to create a sense of optimism in those communities. What's important is that they know these are the resources that they're going to have, and those resources are not going to be taken away. So the first order of business is to lay out a 5-year financial plan that can stabilize the city's finances, commit to certain levels of investment that the community can rely on, knowing full well that they can now start planning. This is now a long-term plan that's not going to be changed from year to year. That's the most important thing. The second thing is, with respects to police, is to immediately recall or invite back retired police officers to supplement, to fill all the ranks, and to supplement the existing number of sworn officers, particularly in the detectives division. If you bring back 400, 500, 600 retired officers, like New York did when Giuliani took over, when he became mayor, or like Dallas has done, or like Denver has done, or for that matter, like they did in London, where they hired 500 constables who had been retired, and these were constables with investigatory experience. You can immediately begin to aggressively clear these cases. And if you establish a witness protection program, because the problem with many of these crimes that are committed is the witnesses and the victims have to go back to their communities. And sometimes it may take a year or two, or sometimes longer, to resolve these cases, and yet these people have to live in fear returning to their communities. If you do those basic things, you're going to have an immediate impact. Those are things that you can do right away. And on the economic development side, if you immediately take advantage of the Opportunity Zone programs that were in the Trump tax bill, massive tax incentives for investors who will invest in poor communities. You welcome those investors. Just because it was in the Trump tax bill, that doesn't mean that we're not going to take advantage of it if it's going to benefit the city. And if you took a portion of these tax increment financing revenues, $700 million, which are not being used in the poorest areas, but are rather being used to support development in affluent areas, if you shifted a third of that into community investments on the west sides and the south sides, the areas of the cities that have been most economically neglected. And then finally, if you take the $20 billion that the city controls in revenue, in contracts, in employees, in the purchase of goods and services. Remember, it's just not that the city not only has its own budget of $9 billion, but the city controls the schools, the airports, the water, the sewer, the Chicago Transit Authority, the Chicago Housing Authority, the Park District, $20 billion. If you begin to prioritize the allocation of resources so that you're not neglecting the neediest communities, and in fact, if you begin to basically do some target contracting or give points to contractors that will hire people from the poorest communities, or that will partner with businesses in the poor communities, or in some cases actually do target marketing to businesses that are opening up or that are already existing and thriving in those poor communities. If you do those type of things, you'll immediately begin to generate economic activity and economic growth, and you'll really be able to create a sense of optimism. So all these things can be done in the first year. All these things can be done in the first year, and they can begin to have an immediate impact. You know, we were able to transform the Chicago Public Schools. I mean, by our second and third year, President Clinton's coming to town claiming us as a model for the nation. I mean, the attitudes changed literally overnight. I mean, so I'm very optimistic that we can move quickly to get the city on the right track.
Creating jobs is a really big topic. It's a big issue as well. Obviously, you know that since you were the budget director for the city, you know, you obviously know that everything begins with a budget and it ends with a budget, right?
Well, yes.
How can we create jobs here? Well, what's the first step for creating jobs? How would you make that happen?
Well, you know, basically I've talked about 5 things. First of all, what's needed in the city, you need to create conditions for growth. Because the city has been declining, because its residential property values have declined by 17% since the 2008 recession, while nationally residential property values have grown by almost 8%. I mean, if our property values had grown at the national rate, we'd be generating something like $900 million more in income from various taxes and fees. You know what I mean? So that just goes to show you when the city is shrinking and its economy is contracting, it has an impact on your revenue collections. And when you're not raising the revenue you need to provide basic services, and when the burden of providing those services are increasing because you're not addressing the issues, the critical social service issues that are needed in the worst communities, in the communities that are struggling the most, what happens is it drives taxes up. So we're paying more in taxes to deal with problems that have been longstanding, and we're raising taxes because our city's not growing, our economy's not growing, our tax base is not growing. So what happens is working families and you know, communities that are doing well, and even affluent communities, are paying more and more and more, and that begins to undermine those communities. That begins to drive out just not working families, but it begins to drive out more affluent families. I mean, do you realize with all the construction that's gone on in the downtown area and the 3-mile radius around downtown, because the overwhelming majority of investment has only been in about 20% of the city, that 90% of the new housing that's been built in the city of Chicago is for renters. They're not building single-family homes, or they're not building multiplexes where families are going and, you know, they're buying, they're buying their home, or they're buying condos. No, they're renting. 90% are renting, which means, I like to say, which means they're dating us, but they're not marrying us. You see, so that does not bear well for the long-term financial health of the city when 90% of new housing is for people who are just, they're renting, they're visiting. It's not permanent housing. It's not.
So how can we make Chicago an affordable place to live?
Well, you know, if you make the type of investments needed to help stabilize communities, and those communities begin to grow, as the economy grows, the tax base expands. As the tax base expands, the pressure to raise taxes and fees subsides. So what I've done is basically a couple things. First of all, I've laid out a very detailed financial plan on how we can meet our pension funding obligations, and we've got to increase our funding for pensions by $1 billion over the next 4 years. And I've laid out how to do that through a combination of protecting our share of revenues that we're entitled to at the state level with the Democratic-controlled House and Senate, veto-proof majorities, and with a Democratic governor. The ability to do that over the next 4 years is significantly enhanced, and by doing a series of things to the current budget that are designed to bring efficiencies to the budget and to realize savings without undermining or adversely impacting programs. Things like reforming workman's comp, we're paying way too much, and negotiating better health contracts with our providers, not reducing health care benefits. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being taken advantage of by our health care providers. Reducing the amount of money we pay for contractual services, because by my estimation, we're paying anywhere from 20 to 30% more on contractual services than we should be if we were doing things like strategic sourcing or standardization, or if we were in fact telling contract service those who we are contracting our services with that we would increase we would extend their contracts in return for a 20% reduction in the cost of those contracts, which I've done in every major city I've taken over, and the contractors have always willingly done it without a lot of protest. Or for that matter, getting a handle on overtime. We're paying 3 times or more the amount of overtime we paid when I was city budget director. The most I ever paid for police overtime, because I filled all the police vacancies, and because of the way we deployed and utilized the police, the most I ever paid was $38 million. We've had years where we've paid $170 million in police overtime.
There's a huge difference.
Right. So there's things. So I've identified about 12 areas where I believe savings can be realized, and where I believe that the city can increase its reimbursements for basic services that they're providing, that they're not billing effectively for. So I think through a combination of things, I'm pretty confident that with my state agenda and with my budget strategy, that we can address the pension issue. And then that would allow us to build a long-term budget that would not require additional increases in fees and fines. In fact, we could probably reduce our fines so that you were never paying a fine that was larger than the fee or the ticket that you were being given. And it would enable us to permanently cap our property taxes. So we would not have to raise new taxes or impose new fees or increase existing fees, and we could permanently cap property taxes for homeowners and for landlords and for businesses. And that will go a long way towards stabilizing the financial situation and bringing financial stability so that homeowners, businesses, renters, they can have a comfort level that they're not going to be getting hit with these ever-increasing taxes and fees. So those things, I think, would begin to improve the business climate and make this city more attractive. Then what I've done is I've laid out a very specific plan. I think I articulated my plan for public safety. But I likewise have talked about what I want to do on the economic development side, taking full advantage of programs like the Opportunity Zone program, the Tax Increment Financing Zone program, using state contracting and hiring in ways that would stimulate economic development. So I think I've articulated a plan on how I can begin investing in those communities so that the communities are not only safer, but we're making the type of investments needed to create conditions for community stabilization and growth, and we can begin to create the prospects of real prosperity, which over the long term will have a much greater impact on making communities more attractive and safer, ultimately then obviously providing the police with the additional resources and support that they need and that we need to provide them with. So, you know, I've really detailed my plan to revitalize the city, and I believe these things can be accomplished. I think there's things we can do immediately to get headed in the right direction in terms of giving the police more resources and at the same time beginning to use the budget and use our tax incentives in ways that help the poorest communities. We can start doing that right away. And then, of course, laying out a 5-year financial plan would be the first order of business. So we can hit the ground running. But, you know, I'm convinced that I could, implement all of my initiatives in the first 4 years of my term. So my goal is not to think beyond the one term, but to try to accomplish all these things in the first term. And I've always had success doing that. I've always had quick success in every major governmental institution I've had
what do you think that
responsibilities
is?
for. Well, because I understand the connection between, I understand how to access and utilize all the revenues, all the resources available at my disposal, and I know how to use them in an efficient way. I also fully understand that budgets and financial plans are supposed to be investment vehicles. So when I develop my budgets, I build those budgets around the need to invest in communities, the need to provide the type of investments that will stabilize and grow the communities. You know, in the schools, my first budget was a budget that stabilized my 558 schools and provided them with the core resources so that they could deliver their educational services in a way that would be uninterrupted, literally for 5 years. And then I also used a portion of those resources so I could begin to put programs in those neighborhood schools that would make those neighborhood schools more attractive. And then I connected the schools with other public and private agencies so that we could, through strategic partnerships, provide more wraparound services, support services. So I was able to allocate resources in a way and connect with other government institutions, both public and private, so that I could transform schools into education and social service centers in neighborhoods, in communities, and that process stimulated a growth in the district that was unprecedented. The only 6 years that the district saw a growth in its population, and during that 6 years by almost 10%, was the 6 years I was superintendent. That's since 1979. Mm-hmm. The district has only grown for 6 years. That's 39 years. It's only grown in 6 years. And those 6 years just happened to be the 6 years I was CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. That's 6 out of 39 years. In the other years, it was either stagnant or it declined. Today, there's 70,000 fewer students in the school system today than the day I left. So that tells you that my policies were not only successful, but it was the abandonment of those basic policies that have led to the schools, the deterioration of the school system.
Would you say your heritage has something to do with your successes and just you having passion for success?
Well,
Because you're Greek American and.
Well, what my Greek American heritage has given me is, I believe, a work ethic. We work 7 days a week. We're in the restaurant business, and we went.
Everybody is. Every Greek is.
We went to church and we lit a candle, and then we went to work.
There you go.
We made our stuff at all. Me. I pray 3 times a day. I pray in the morning. I pray in the afternoon. I pray in the evening. But I work nonstop. I work like I worked, like my dad worked. When we were in the restaurant business, we worked 7 days a week. This is what we do. We love to work, and we pick occupations that satisfy us. So if you select a job that you love, then you really don't work. It becomes your vocation. It becomes a part of who you are. It becomes the essence of who you are. I think that has a lot to do with my heritage, because Greeks know how to work. Greeks are entrepreneurs. Greeks are very industrious. They're very innovative, and what's also helped me in terms of my Greek heritage is the fact that Greeks acclimate themselves to so many different communities. We are able to go in and make real contributions to our communities, but we're able to do it without losing our identity. And when you look at the Greeks in communities, we always contribute. I grew up in a household where I never heard a racial slur or an ethnic slur, where a household where tolerance and respect for the opinions of others was organic. I don't know if it was never an issue. Maybe growing up in the restaurant business and having to deal with the diversity of opinions on people sitting around the counter was educational. But we Greeks, we make every community that we settle in better, and we do it by contributing to that community, by respecting the communities where we settle. But we do it without losing our identity. And I think that's important, and not everybody can say that.
How can we maintain that? Because obviously Chicago's a melting pot here, right? We have a lot of different ethnicities and communities. Right,
and let's face it, when I was a kid, my mom would lecture us when we were little in the back seat of the car of our 1953 Chevy, saying, "You better marry a Greek." By the time I was in my 20s, my mom was bringing girls for me to meet, and she didn't care what nationality they were. Or,
you know what that's called, right, in Greek? It's called a proxenio. You know that, right?
As long as they were educated, and as long as my mom felt that they could make me a better man, she was introducing them to me. So she evolved, But my wife is Dutch. She's and she comes. It's interesting because we're 100% Greek family. She's 100% Dutch family. So I have these strapping, beautiful boys who are all tall and they have the best features of both. But I think you maintain your identity through your religion and through the preservation of your language. So my boys, they didn't go to Greek school as long as I did, but obviously they were exposed, obviously to the Greek language. And I was fortunate because Yaya and Papuya lived with us. My mother's mother lived with us. My dad says that she came for 3 weeks and stayed for 26 years. And she did. And then his father stayed with us for 14 years, and they never talked to each other, by the way.
Oh my God!
But yeah, they fought constantly. But the point is, we grew up in a 3-generation household, and my sons didn't have the benefit of that. And what's amazing with my parents, as well as my wife's parents, is their insistence, despite my wife's parents being in their 80s, and my parents, now my dad over 90 and my mother 88, they insist on living alone. They will not move in with their children. They will not move to retirement homes or for that matter, these residential centers. To this day, my mother, with all her physical ailments, takes care of my dad, who has lost a lot of his mobility. But it's just an amazing thing to say. But but my boys, admire their Greek heritage. But I mean, they are, it gives them their sense of identity. In fact, my boy was a combat medic in Afghanistan. He was a Navy corpsman who decided to be a field medic, which means he then was trained and integrated into a Marine unit. And he was with the 5th Marines in Afghanistan, and he got a tattoo. And so he came back with a full sleeve tattoo. But I have to admit, it's a beautiful tattoo because the sleeve tattoo is the 300 Spartans. So he's got the.
So that's what was accepted.
Well, he came back. He came back from Afghanistan, and my wife saw the tattoo, and she was not pleased. I, of course, said,
Hey,
he's been in combat. He's been on active duty for 5 years. If he wants to have a tattoo, let him have a tattoo. You know what I mean? So, but the point is, I don't. You don't have to be, happy about it. Although he's dating a marvelous assistant state's attorney who loves his tattoo, but it's something to be admired. And again, I mean, he thought as much about his heritage that he basically, he
tattooed it.
He basically tattooed it on his arm.
There you go.
And he has this magnificent 300 Spartans tattoo. It's pretty.
So
interesting.
basically, we should never lose our ethnic backgrounds.
No,
in Chicago, obviously, if you were to be elected for mayor, you'd obviously want to make sure that all of those things are implemented.
Well,
right?
I'm always going to be supportive of the Greek community. I'm proud of what some of the many Greek communities have begun to do by opening the church and opening their communities to others, to individuals who may not be of Greek descent. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see it in New York where they opened up this marvelous charter school, and this charter school in New York, I think about 40 or 50% of the students who attend the charter school are non-Greeks. And about I think 35–40% of this, I'm getting the statistics a bit off, but a large number of the children who are attending the school and learning about Greek history and Greek culture and are black and are from the inner city, So I think our willingness to, invite others to be part, because Hellenism is. It's a philosophy. It's it's more than just ethnicity. It's a philosophy. It's an attitude. It's a work ethic. It's a sense of community. It's a sense of public service. I mean, Hellenism. I mean, Alexander spread Hellenism over 2/3 of the known world. And at the end of the day, it's a lifestyle. It's your convictions. It's your morals. It's your ethics. It's your philosophy. It's just more than race, so to speak. It's just more than ethnicity. And I think our willingness to share that and to invite people into our culture. The Greeks have always been educators. I mean, I joke that when the Romans conquered Greece, they were so impressed with the Greeks because they copied so much from the Greeks that they gave Greeks their independence, and on condition that they would pledge their fealty to the emperor. And then, of course, they left, and then we refused because we're too independent. And then they went in and they occupied Greece again. But again, I mean,
your Greek school teacher would be very proud.
That's right. That's right. But that's I mean, we have so much to offer, and I think that that sense of Hellenism will always sustain us because it's as much a state of mind. It's as much a belief, a commitment to ideals, to making the next generation, giving opportunities to the next generation, making the sacrifices for the next generation so that the next generation can thrive and grow and prosper and perhaps not face the challenges and some of the obstacles that the current generation faced. I think all those ideas, all those things are the essence of Hellenism. So I think we have a lot to offer the communities that we have become a part of and that we've served all these years.
What is your message to voters on Election Day?
Well, obviously my political message has been I'm the most capable person to take on these great challenges and to offer real solutions. But, I think the most important message is for people to participate in the democratic process. Let's face it, we're Greeks. We invented democracy.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, if you want change, you have to vote for it. The challenges in Chicago, in many ways, the political, I call it the political industrial complex. Because Chicago is probably one of the most corrupt cities in the country because it hasn't separated money from politics. And the political system is designed to perpetuate the status quo. And by doing that, and the way they achieve that is they do everything they can to minimize political participation. They make it hard for candidates to get on the ballot. Because so much of campaigning is advertising and things like that, getting on TV, et cetera, or the perception is that so much of it is that. Mm-hmm. They really dry up the money that candidates who are not part of the political establishment can raise. So they try to minimize their ability to connect with voters. And then they pick a month to have the election that's the coldest month, that is the most inconvenient month for voting in February. And it's a month when there are no other elections going on. All right, so it's all designed to minimize voter turnout. The only way you break this system is by going out and voting, is by not viewing voting as an inconvenience, but voting as not only your right, but your obligation. You have an obligation to participate in the political process, because when people do not participate, when they do not get out and vote, when they do not mobilize in large numbers, so we have the type of turnout that is really needed to bust this political establishment that's been strangling the city, then we have no one else but ourselves to blame when our budgets aren't getting balanced, when our infrastructure is decaying, when our schools are getting worse, when there are areas of the city where there's no economic investment, and when we have this recurring series of scandals involving aldermen, elected officials, people who have been serving on boards, mm-hmm. who have been exploiting the system and have been getting rich at the expense of the public and at the expense of the taxpayers. So if you want change, you have to vote for it. It is your right and your obligation to participate in the political process, and the most effective way to participate is to take advantage of all the avenues that are now available to us to become fully informed about the candidates and their positions, and to go out and exercise your Constitution, and I like to say God-given right to vote and to effectuate the change through the ballot box that the city really needs.
Every vote counts.
Every single vote counts, and we've learned that in the past few elections.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your slogan. Solves problems, gets results.
Yeah, we were debating.
Did you come up with that?
Well, my original slogan, we have two slogans. It's VALLAS for all Chicago.
Okay.
But if you look at my record, it's all about solving problems and getting results. And I like to think that I've had success in every one of my public service challenges. That every public service assignment I've had, every school district I've run, every budget I've balanced, every project I've worked on, like the work I did for the Bureau of Indian Education, where I basically went to Indian reservations and began to rethink the things that the federal government could do to improve the quality of education on the Indian reservations, and of course the work I did for the Justice Department on how to better prepare individuals in the federal prison system for reentry into their communities. I think at every single station, at every single public service assignment, I like to think that I've exceeded expectations, and the expectations I set for myself are generally pretty high. And so I've been a problem solver all my life, and I've never thought of doing anything else but public service or going in and helping people. I'm genetically incapable of turning down a sincere invitation for help, and it's just, maybe that's the influence. Well, it's the influence of my mother in large part, who never turned anyone away, or my father, but it's also the influence of my priest, who for over 5 decades, Father Byron Papa Nicolau at the St. Constantine and Hellenic Greek Orthodox Church, who incidentally was the priest who mentored Father Alex, so I think he heavily influenced me, my sense of public service. In fact, I thought about being I wanted to be a priest when I was very young. In fact, my glasses, my dark rimmed glasses, Father Byron had dark rimmed glasses. When I got my first glasses, I got the same frames that Father Byron had. Yeah, exactly. But I never pursued the priesthood because I stuttered and stammered. So I could never speak Greek without stuttering and stammering, because I stuttered and stammered, obviously my native tongue in English, well into my 30s. But I could never overcome my stutter and stammer.
But that was a challenge for you, and you overcame that.
Yeah, well, at least in one language. But I struggled
at least in one language. You know what?
I struggled in one language.
No one's perfect, Mr. VALLAS. No one's perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Best of luck. And I hope to see you soon. Well, thank you very much for your time.
There's a real prospect here for the 3rd largest city in the country to be led by a Greek American, and I think there's so much that we can offer. There's so much I think that I can offer to the city, but more important, there's so much that the Greek community can offer to Chicago, and by definition, because the assignments that I've been given have always given me an opportunity to create models for other school districts to follow. I think what we do in Chicago can be a model for other struggling cities, and who better than a Greek American to accomplish that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Parakallah. There's nothing Chicago politicians fear more than this broom. I'm Paul Vallas, and I'll sweep out the money that has corrupted City Hall. I'll invest in schools, fighting crime, and creating jobs. I'm ready for mayor to sweep out the Chicago machine and to invest in people and not corrupt politicians. I have the experience, the solutions, and the tools to do it. Join us in cleaning up City Hall for all Chicagoans.